It's an intellectual misconception to think that the ceasefire or peace could come as a result of a Russian-Ukrainian negotiation. It will never happen. The peace is not coming from that source. The peace and ceasefire could come exclusively only a Russian-American negotiation, whether we like it or not.
Do you believe
whether Europeans are ready to accept or not, whether the Ukrainians accept or not. Finally, the only way to make peace and agreement is a Russian-American agreement. And not only on the war, and not only on territories and border lines and whatever, but on trade, energy, investments. It's a bigger package.
NATO enlargement.
NATO enlargement, a big package. And only the American president is the man who can put together that. Trade, NATO, all that kind of issues. So it will be a big package, and the Ukrainians are not strong enough to make that kind of deal with the Russians.
Do you think Zelenskyy said that time was on his side, even military, because he's counting on endless support from the EU?
I think so, definitely.
But did he actually believe it as well?
Right, that's the question.
I think, okay, there are two possibilities. He was honest or he was not honest. But I think he was. He thought seriously.
Do you think they're crazy enough, the Eurocrats, to actually build a European army? Of course, now we've seen the rearm plan from Ursula von der Leyen, where she puts together a defense fund of 800 billion euros. Do you think they'll go one step further and send Europeans to the front?
Okay, it's getting more and more complicated. So the first is the future of Ukraine. The second is the army question of Europe, and the army question of Ukraine. Okay, so it's three combining questions. So the first is, probably it sounds not very much polite to the Ukrainians, but the fact is that what was the situation prior to the war? Okay, prior to the war, we had Russia, we have NATO, and there was a buffer zone. And the buffer zone called Ukraine. That was the situation. Then the Europeans and the Americans decided, and probably convinced the Ukrainians as well, that de facto they should move ahead that Ukraine becoming member in order to become member of the Western structures. Even legally they cannot be member of NATO, but practically they will be. You know, because of weapon system, because of intelligence services, because of sharing of information. So step by step, they will become the Western security structure, militarily and economically as well. So they convinced the Ukrainians, I was not there, so I don't know how difficult was that this is a viable and feasible plan. And they started to do so. But the key element of that concept was that the Russians will accept it. But unfortunately, the Russians decided not to accept it. And of course, it was illegal against the international law and whatever. It was a dirty invasion on behalf of Russia against Ukraine. So no question of that. But the fact is that it was a intellectual misconception, that the Russians will live with this new situation. The Russians will do everything to stop it. They will never let NATO close to their neighborhood, especially not on the playing field as it is in Ukraine and Russia. So the Russians decided to stop it. So this is the story. If we would like to have a peace longer term, we have to go back to the starting point. So the West has to give up the concept that somehow Ukraine is part of the Western architecture militarily and economically. We have to go back and to say, okay, let's sit down with the Russians and to discuss the future, how to manage the territory between NATO and Russia. Let's start from that point. So that's the first, okay. So if this is the only way to find a long-term solution, it means, of course, that it's impossible that we Westerners will finance a Ukrainian army of 1 million soldiers as it is the plan at this moment. So it's a misconception. The only thing what we can do, and I think we should do, to invest a lot of money, not to the Ukrainian army, but to the European capacities, military industry, defense industry, and army in Europe, because Europe is simply too weak. And that's what we call peace dividend. You understand what is it, yeah? Peace dividend. Peace dividend means that we never, for long term, we haven't invested into military, so we invested somewhere else, so we got a dividend. and security was provided by United States. Basically, this is